Paul here from My Perfect Failure, helping you turn your failures into successes and your setbacks into opportunity. So what's the real key to leading with intention and purpose? My guest today, Malumir R Logan, knows firsthand from working multiple jobs just to make ends meet to discovering her passion for people-centered leadership. She shares her inspiring story of resilience, empathy, and mindfulness. Want to learn how to create a team that thrives and performs because they want to? Stay tuned as she breaks down her game-changing approach to leadership that's all about putting people first.
Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates, and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today, I'm super excited as I have another amazing guest for you. So, our guest today is an anti-oppressive, trauma-informed leader, systems thinker, writer of creative non-fiction, poetry, blog posts, and short stories, tarot creator, Reiki master. She's looking to inspire expansiveness for systematically excluded. So a very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Malumir R Logan. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're very welcome indeed. And I'm super intrigued to have a conversation with you because we haven't spoken before. But your background, so that was a shrink wrap version of your background. There's so much more to you, what you do. We know that I know that you're big on leadership. You teach that, and I guess that's something that very important to you. But we're going to get into this in a second, but your background is so rich and varied. So you've been, I guess, teaching leadership for over 2 decades. You're a operational expertise. You're an author, small business owner, neurolinguist practitioner, a university professor even. Wow. So, and there's more to it than that. So what would be lovely initially is just to capture a bit of Malumir and how you got into these varied careers. And just finally for me, to a high level as well. So they don't feel like things that you dabbled with. They feel like things that maybe you found some level of purpose with, and you felt, you know what, I'm gonna put everything into this. So lovely to get your thoughts on that.
And I love the fact that you use the word purpose, because I am a very purposeful, intentional person. And I feel that it's actually because I've always had to be. So I'm not sure if you've heard, some people have said, oh, I fell into my career. Yeah. I did not fall into my career. I didn't have the luxury of falling into a career at all. When I actually started working, so I don't actually have 2 decades of teaching leadership experience, but I have been working for 2 decades. And when I first started, I was working multiple, mostly client-facing, customer service, frontline jobs. And I was tutoring, and I was working typically 4 jobs at a time, including overnight jobs. I was working all the time. I did not have the advantage of a college education, a university education, because I'd had a rough upbringing. I'd been told growing up that I was stupid and that I came across as uneducated. Like it was not an easy start. And yet I had this drive within me that, no, you know what? I'm going to be happy and I'm going to figure this out. And I always said to myself, I don't know what all the answers are, but I know they'll come. If I keep looking and I keep pushing myself and I keep exploring and I keep an open mind and I stay curious and I just work really hard, I'm going to figure it out. And so I worked in customer service for some time, just making ends meet and tutoring. And through volunteer work, I actually started teaching at an elementary school. I was a teacher's assistant volunteering, but they actually had me teaching advanced math classes before long, and I worked with every grade and I loved it. And I thought maybe I'll be a teacher. But then discovered that there was this one incident, and there were two classes that had been brought together, and a teacher was giving a talk. They were saying to the children, and these kids were all about the ages of 6 to 8. And the teacher said to these kids, what's a dumb animal? What's a really dumb animal? Sheep. Sheep are pretty dumb. If one sheep jumps off the bridge, they all jump off the bridge. And I'm sitting there thinking, where is this person going with this?
Yeah.
This is a strange lesson, right? And she then proceeded to compare all the children to sheep. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this could be so damaging. And I understand what she's getting, but like, no, 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 no. So I interjected, which was quite a thing for me as a volunteer to interject with someone who's, a permanent teacher in this school board. And so I interjected. I said, oh, may I add something? And she went, oh, yes, please. I said to the kids, the good thing is you get to choose what animal you want to be. And so I got them starting to think about smart animals. Yes, you could be a horse. You could be a bear. Yes, you could be a dog. That's great. But in that moment, I realized I don't think this is the right system for me. If I become a teacher, I'm going to become burned out. And I don't want to be one of those teachers that either burns out or does damage. And so I was thrown back into, what am I going to do? I still don't have the answers. I kept searching. I thought, maybe I'll get into media. And so I got into media and publishing. I was a makeup artist. I did makeup and hair for a while. And it's funny now because people know what my career is now and all of my leadership expertise and my teaching at a university. And I'm a small business owner. People think, you did makeup? Yes. I did makeup, and we can talk color theory and color wheels, until the cows come home, right? And as time went on, I realized I was working for a magazine, well-respected magazine, but I realized I still this is not the right fit for me. This isn't challenging enough in the right ways. And that sense of purpose wasn't getting filled. That sense of purpose was nowhere near getting filled. And so I started doing a lot of research. I discovered urban and regional planning, which I'd never heard of before.
What's that, sorry?
Urban and regional planning. So like city planning.
Okay.
But not only referring to cities. And basically it's, there's a planning department that exists. The UK has all sorts of planning departments, Canada, the US, there's all sorts of planning departments. And the idea is, how is the city developing, and how can we do it in a way that we're making sure we're making enough sense, right? Are we building buildings where we don't have infrastructure, for example? We can't have that. So I discovered that. I started, and that got me into public service. That's when I discovered public service and the sense of being able to contribute to the public good. But from there, and this, the entire time, what really drove me was my passion for people. I care a great deal about people. As I mentioned earlier, I did not have the easiest of upbringings, and as I pursued counseling over the years and began to heal from a lot of that, I still never forgot anything. And I will never forget, back when I was working all those jobs, I was living below the poverty line, and I will never forget what that feels like. I think sometimes people refer to, oh, you just get used to living in the way you do and you forget. Maybe I'm just one of those experiential people. I will never forget what that feels like. And as my career has developed over time, I've worked in places where I've been supported. And I've also worked in places where my intersectional identity has run up against the serrated edges of the systems in which our corporate systems just exist, right? And it's not that anyone necessarily intends to be that way, but this is how systems work. And as I continue to develop my career, I was also trying to help others. Even before I was in a formal leadership role, I was trying to help others. I was trying to mentor others, because as I was figuring stuff out, I was thinking, let me help others figure this stuff out too. And so as I was developing my career, I was also refinding my spirituality, which I had been very spiritual as a small child, and then a lot of that kind of disappeared, again, given the difficulties at the time. But as I continued to do my personal work, to heal from all of those years of difficulty, I also refound my spirituality, and that felt very nourishing. It uplifted me. But I also realized, again, this is something else that can help people. If people can find their own spirituality, it doesn't need to be mine. You can figure out what works for you. But it also helped me discover meditation and mindfulness, and really actually paying attention to ourselves and paying attention to our internal alignment. And so as time went on, then I began to pursue leadership, because to me, leadership was inherently about people. And I once approached this executive in an organization I worked for, and I asked for a one-on-one. I wanted to hear from her thoughts on leadership, and ask, if she had advice for how I could develop my career in leadership in the organization. And so I shared with her my vision for leadership. I didn't have the vocabulary at the time, but what I described was people-centered leadership. That's what I described. Her response was to say, "Oh, we don't do that here. You could go work in retail if you want to do that. We don't do that here. Maybe something operational. I don't know. Yeah, we don't do that here." And I was fairly junior at the time, and I went to the bathroom and I cried, because this was what I knew leadership to be. You couldn't convince me otherwise, because it's not just about getting stuff done. It's never just about delivering. Anybody can do that. That's not what it's about. It's actually about people. Fundamentally and entirely, it is about people. If you invest in people, you're actually watering the correct seed, and then everything else will come from that. So it took some time, and I got into informal leadership roles, where technically my title was not leadership, but it's what I was doing. And then I got into more formal leadership roles and began to climb the ranks, and actually put my model of leadership into practice, which has proven to be very, very effective in every way, and ethical, which is important to me.
So very interesting and an incredible journey that you've been on. So the lady or the person you spoke to, where you said, I think it was people-centered leadership you wanted to focus on, do you think that she actually understood what leadership meant?
I think that her model of leadership was what many people unconsciously have as a model of leadership, where they think it's just about, I am the boss of this area, and I have to make sure all these things get done, and I answer to these people.
Yeah.
And the thing is, those things can all be true, but that's the what, that's not the how. I really care about the how, and the how is the people.
Yeah. Okay. So I was going to ask you a question. What is people-centered leadership? But is it the how?
It is the how. It's putting people at the center of how you lead. And really, it's in your mindset, right? So let's say, as a leader of, there were, let's say, 2 teams at one point that I was leading, and they had different deliverables they were responsible for. And it was ultimately, it was my accountability. I was accountable to make sure these things happen. And I reported to these people above me. Absolutely. And these people reported to me. And that is the hierarchical framework of it. But that's not what leadership is. That is just basic structure. That's not how you're doing things. How I did things is I created healthy environments where people were psychologically safe. Now, I don't get to determine whether it's a safe environment. I hate when people say this is a safe space. You don't get to decide that, right? You as the leader, you can say it to, as much as you want, but you don't get to decide, right? It's just like, I don't get to decide whether I'm an ally. I can behave in ways that, I believe are aligned with allyship, but that doesn't make me an ally. Other people get to decide whether I'm an ally, and it's the same thing. I did my best to create a space that is psychologically safe, where people are respected, and where they are listened to, where they are valued. And the funny thing is that when I did that, it turned teams around. There had been times I had inherited, this one time I inherited a completely dysfunctional team, and I turned things around. I turned things around in a year. And it is possible to take a team that is just not working together and create a collaborative environment where people actually enjoy showing up to work, where people both like and respect me as a leader, and for anyone who's been in a formal leadership role, you'll know that's hard to achieve. And so, yes, it really is about putting people at the center of how you're doing things. For example, if there's, say, a presentation that is due, suddenly becomes due, and it's needed today for some reason. Let's just say that I, as the leader, first of all, in the background, it starts with, I don't just blindly say, oh, yes, it's due today, and then turn around and action it out. I want to make sure I actually understand what exactly is it? Who is it for? It's due today. Okay, help me understand the timeline. Like, make sure you actually understand what's happening, right? Because maybe it's not actually always due today. Because, it's so common, especially these days, for urgency and importance to become conflated. And it's my job as a leader to make sure I'm understanding what is actually important in this request and where, if any, is there urgency. So let's just say after I do that, I assess, okay, yes, this is actually due today. And so instead of needing to push back or develop a workaround, I say, okay, great, let me take this to the team. So I go to the team and I will, assess who I think has capacity, and I'll check in, if I have a team lead reporting to me and the other leaders, I'll check in with them, see what they think on who has capacity. And then it's in how you ask. It's not like, here's the thing, get it done, and I need to see it by 3 p.m. You also have to think about how you're communicating to people, right? Now, maybe I've had to pay extra attention to how I communicate, given that I am autistic. However, it is possible. If I, as an autistic person, can do it, other people, we can learn. It's a skill. It's a skill to learn to think about our audience, and our audience is always who's listening to us. They're always the person who's on the other end of our conversation. If we're texting our friend or our partner, that person is our audience. And it's the same thing with leadership, right? Our staff in that moment is our audience. And are we communicating in a way that also respects that they are not machines, they are people? And, so that's just one example. And you can still set timelines for things to get done by. And the fact is that when you create that kind of environment where people are performing because they want to perform, because they want to come through for you, because they feel safe to be their best, and they're not shut down because they actually feel safe and welcome and that they belong, they perform very highly. These become highly performing teams who deliver incredible work.
Amazing stuff, and very eloquently packaged together. Lots of takeouts from that. So how do you, when you go into a team, so you mentioned that there was a team or teams that you've had to engage with that were pretty dysfunctional. How do you get into the nitty-gritty of, I guess, bringing leadership into that team and maybe looking at the different egos and personalities that are invariably always involved in decisions? I can be in meetings, and you get, or over the years you've been in meetings and you get, everybody wants to talk and maybe have their position be maybe taken, maybe having their position overriding what everybody else is saying. How do you deal with those situations?
Yes. So my first approach is, when I'm coming in, I am observing. I'm not going in there, and making all sorts of sweeping changes right away. I'm going in and observing, because the fact is, teams have been like they have for some time. Unless it is a completely net new team, they've been like this for a while, and it will serve me and serve everyone to just pay attention and observe the patterns, get a sense for where things are going on, because these issues can be complex, but they're not usually complicated. It's a matter of making sure, and I mean, this is just a leadership principle in general, make sure we're solving the correct problem. How much angst is there in the corporate world and elsewhere because we're not actually solving the correct problem? And so I go in and I just observe. And I set up one-on-ones with each person. I get to know every single person, and I set up regular one-on-ones. And so I'm observing, I'm interacting with people, but I also want to understand not only the day-to-day work that they're doing, I also want to understand, how did they get there? How did they, and this is a question when I start on a new team, I ask every person, so how did you get here? Like, not physically, how did you get here today, but how did you come to be in this job? Tell me the story. And it's fascinating to get to know their journeys, because you learn so much. And see, part of my job as a leader, it's not just for, to lead this team, to create that environment, to get things done. It's also to support those people in their careers. That is part of your job as a leader. And for anyone who doesn't realize or doesn't think that's part of their job as a leader, that's something you may want to rethink about, right? Because how did you get where you are? And, and for many people, some people might think, well, I had to scrape myself into here. Okay, there was probably a little more going on. That's another conversation, but it's part of our role to support people in their leadership roles. Again, this is part of being a people first leader. And when I have those conversations, it means that I don't just see this person as this cog who performs this specific role. I'm getting to know them and what they care about and what they're interested in, both in terms of their daily work, but also what they want for their career. And that can also allow me to be supportive of their career goals, because we've all been in jobs that haven't been a great fit for us from time to time. And sometimes dysfunction can come because someone's trying to force themselves into a role where they don't actually enjoy the work. And so, in those cases, it's just a matter of, okay, you seem to really enjoy when you do these kinds of tasks, but these other tasks, like, tell me what's going on there. And so much of it is about having a conversation. Now, I will say, this doesn't mean that as a people-centered leader that you don't have hard conversations, because sometimes you have to have hard conversations, and sometimes there are performance issues. That's just a reality. But in my experience, those tend to be genuine performance issues where someone is not performing because they can't be bothered. Those are rare. Those are actually very, very rare. Usually there's something else going on, and it's my job to figure out what that is so that I can open the way for either someone to do kinds of projects on the team that are a better fit, or maybe they need some kind of adjustment that will work better for them, or maybe there's something else going on. But, it's really about going in, observing, getting to know people, and then, yes, sometimes making some challenging changes or having some difficult conversations. And it's a lot, all that all takes courage. It takes patience, and it also takes developing strategic thinking, which is also a skill. That is also a skill that can be developed.
Do you enjoy it? So when you are going in to support a client, and I guess you'll have an initial conversation, and they'll probably give you like a synopsis of what they believe is going on and where they believe the challenges are. Then I guess you'll go in and do your bit. Do you enjoy the challenge of, because I'm just thinking about people and adults, and about how difficult we can be at times, and about how we want to be heard, and how we think that our voice is the most important voice, that our position on whatever the subject matter is the most important or relevant position within the business, or maybe that scenario. So I'm extremely wowed by people that do your job, because how difficult it can be to get a cohesive team together, and you get everybody rowing in the same direction. So do you enjoy the challenge when you speak to a client? And but many of us might think, wow, this is a big job. This is a big challenge.
So, although I haven't done this type of role from a consulting perspective, what I will say is that it's actually harder when it is actually just your job. And it's like, here's the team that you're taking over, please. And frequently that's how it happens, is teams get assigned, at least in the organizations that I've worked for, they get assigned. And I think it would actually be easier to do it from a consulting perspective, because, and this is something I know from folks who do work in consulting, is that you only have so much, there's only so much that you can do. And ultimately, it's not actually your decision at the end of the day, it's the client's. And I would say it's actually even more challenging when it is your team, because you're the one who's going to be living with it, right?
Yeah.
And I would, if I'm honest, I will say, as much as I'm good at meeting that challenge, it is stressful. It
Yeah, I can
is
imagine.
stressful because, I mean, I care about people. And even if someone is really maybe a challenge, because, sometimes, as you said, sometimes someone thinks that they've been being the superstar,
Mm.
for ages, and they're great, and they're capable, and they're just doing so well, but they don't know how to work with other people, and then that causes a lot of issues. Trying to then be someone who is saying to a superstar, here's the feedback, and I need you to take this feedback, and trying to find ways to get through to people who don't want to hear feedback, even when you do it in a compassionate way. That's really hard, and it is stressful. It is not for the faint of heart. And
Mm.
this is one of the reasons that when people are, I one of the courses I teach is a career navigation course, and I'm always, saying to people who are interested in leadership, just make sure that you understand what leadership is before you are pursuing it, because it can be really difficult, particularly if you are leading in a way that leads to sustainability, which is what I argue people-centeredness is. It is more sustainable. And why do I say that? Because what I love in leadership, the part that I actually enjoy, is once I've built the momentum after I've created that environment and struggled through all that struggle, and now the environment is healthy. Now the environment is safe. Now people are collaborative,
Mm.
and now we're just flying.
Yeah.
That's the part I enjoy. That's the part I really enjoy. And it is possible. And the great thing is that it then becomes much more self-sustaining because
Mm.
you've kind of created that structure. Um, but of course, I mean, that it can only be so self-sustaining as the other structures around you and your area are also set up that way. Which again, then comes back to the responsibility of leadership, because, especially at this time, a lot of people are starting to realize that the models of leadership that we've had in the past aren't quite enough. It's not that it's all, garbage. It's not, there's lots of really excellent leadership theory out there. But just like we did with economics, where we challenged the idea of the rational actor with behavioral science, which recognized that actually humans are not rational. And now, how do we apply real human psychology and real human behavior to those economic models? It's the same thing when it comes to leadership, that we have to realize that people are not machines, and how we choose to interact with them
Yeah.
and engage with them determines whether you're treating people like the gas that you put in your car, or petrol, as you folks call it, or if you're treating them like the engine, which you really want to keep in great
Mm.
condition and to keep moving instead of just burning through them.
Yeah. Is there a lot of, in terms of your methodology, or just maybe just an opinion, how much does psychology play in understand? I don't know whether the right word is psychology, whether it's ego, but in terms of the different dynamics when you're trying to you've taken over a team, and you know that you've got some strong personalities in there that like to be heard, or maybe you've got some personalities in there that are more timid, that maybe you recognize that these guys have loads to offer, which is really important for that team, but maybe they don't feel that they can offer those. They don't feel confident enough to maybe offer their valuable contributions. Where does psychology or ego play? Or maybe there's something else that's important for those situations.
Yes, I would say that the psychological element, which I just think of as that's observing people's
Mm.
behavior and understanding patterns over time. Like, no one has to go out and get a psychology degree or anything like that, but it's really paying attention to people. And I'd say the other component is the anti-oppressive mindset. And when I say anti-oppressive, what I mean is that, you know, we can't possibly grow up in society without absorbing some of those old ways and old beliefs. For example, even though I'm a racialized woman, the fact is that just growing up in society, I've unintentionally absorbed sexism and racism. And I don't want any of that. And I have to confront that in myself, and I have to, relearn, but we all do. And the challenge there is that those same issues are naturally embedded in the systems around us. That's just how human social development happens. That's just reality. And so recognizing that that's an issue, and recognizing that, like, fundamentally what it means is that people are not all having the same experience in their careers. They are not all having the same experience. And frequently, there are people who have very loud voices that get heard. And then there are other people who, maybe they're not even quiet. Maybe they are trying to talk, but they just don't get heard as much, or they don't get noticed as much, or the work that they do is not valued in the same way as other people. And this is not about getting out the violins, right? This is just reality. This is the lived reality of many of us who are othered in some way. People can be othered for various reasons, whether it's due to how they look, whether it's due to their gender identity, or whatever. People get othered for all sorts of reasons. And for example, in particularly North American corporate culture, extroversion is seen as a good thing, and introversion is seen as other. And so particularly in that particular example that you gave, as the leader, there's both the psychology of understanding what is going on with the person who's talking really loudly. Are they talking loudly because they actually don't feel confident? Is there something like that going on? Is it, because sometimes it is. Sometimes it is they're just desperate to make sure that you understand their worth. And so maybe you can actually solve the issue by making sure that they feel recognized. The only thing is that, again, if you're going to create a collaborative environment, you got to do that in a way that shows that, that you're recognizing their work, and then you're recognizing the whole team's work. And you can actually build in mechanisms to do that on a weekly basis. But also the anti-oppressive perspective recognizes that the quiet person in the room, you can also ask if they have thoughts they want to share. They may not initially feel safe saying yes in the room. You may have to build that up over time, but there are ways of allowing that space and, saying, thank you so much to the star person, I say in air quotes, so, the person who's speaking a lot. And then going around and asking, I'd love to hear other thoughts as well. For example, so-and-so, I know you've been doing work on ABC. Just wondering if you have thoughts on the, this specific thing, and giving them a question and just saying, do you have any ideas? Because for a lot of people, they'll just shut down. They're like, no, I don't have ideas. Because if I try saying anything, someone over there is going to talk over me, because lots of us have had that experience. But instead, crafting a very specific question that gives that person something they can talk about. If things have been toxic for a while, and if they have been silenced regularly, it may take time and they may not feel safe saying that much in that time, but you can build up that trust over time. You can keep having one-on-ones. You can have smaller group meetings that ensure that that person has the opportunity to share more in ways that work for them. And gradually over time, you will change that culture around. But again, it's a long game. And that's why the sustainability factor is really important.
Yeah. So around that idea, and I love the idea of the quieter people that we know that we want to help them blossom and enjoy, feel valued. I guess there might be different ways of doing this, but just a question that comes to mind. So you mentioned about having one-to-ones when you take over a team, you'll have the one-to-ones, you'll get to know that individual, get to know what makes them tick, what doesn't, and what they're looking to achieve, how they actually arrive there. Would you say, or could you say, when we have the team meetings, I'm really keen, I understand that your interest in your role, I know that you've got huge interest and huge value, and I know you want our team to really operate at the maximum. So what I'm going to do periodically is, or maybe you'd agree on this, but periodically, I'm just going to ask for your opinion. I'm not going to make a big deal about it. You can say that you want to contribute, or if you feel actually that everything's been covered and there's nothing for you to contribute on this particular subject, then obviously you're free to say that. Would you have those little interjections if you think they're relevant?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And another thing that can also, because often there's the confidence piece, there's the communication skill piece, because it can be hard to take hold of the floor if you're not used to grabbing the mic, so to speak, right? Metaphorically. And so there's the demonstrating how to do that, and also just demonstrating it yourself as, you know, as the leader, because when you're in the team, sure, you're the leader, but now you're also just a team member having a conversation. So you can model that. And also you can edify people to more senior leaders. And this is really, really valuable, because sometimes folks, particularly if they're in more junior to mid-level staff roles, where they don't actually know how much their work matters. They may not actually realize or think that it's actually doing that much. And so what I would create is I would create weekly or biweekly check-ins with the relative executive and make sure to edify people for their work, to point out, and so, did this work this week, and this was important because A, B, and C, and so did that work. And it helps not only because then it's like, oh, wow, they're praising me to the boss, but also it's showing them how their work fits into the bigger picture, which helps people feel more connected. And then they realize, actually, my work does matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's so many ways of coming about this. I will say also, just from an empowerment angle, because we've been talking about this from the perspective of what the leader can do, but what about for people like the person who is quieter? And also, as leaders, many of us still have leaders that we report to, and we can face these same issues. For example, there have been many times that I've been the one and only at the table, with a table full of males who all look exactly the same and often think very much the same. And how do I make sure that my voice is heard in that, especially if it happens to be a table at which I may not have championship, because we don't always. So my advice there is that, again, really observe, try to figure out because sometimes it makes sense to push, and other times it makes sense to sit back and take in and think, and to notice, maybe you won't be talking a huge amount at this table, but where can you kind of like drop a big one, drop that big idea or that important observation. And sometimes, yes, people will still try to, steal the idea as their own, but how can you make sure that you are still making yourself an active participant when it counts? And sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes your emotional well-being isn't worth it. But, I want to empower people as well.
Can you be strategic in those moments? So say when you know that we can offer something that is potentially been missed, that is really impactful, and we know this is going to make a difference to whatever that conversation is. Can we sometimes be clever and just give them just give them enough where there's a tease there, and then we draw back because the full, I guess, sum isn't complete because we've just given them part enough for them to think, actually, I hadn't thought about that. Then at some point they're going to have to come back, or maybe later on during that meeting, or maybe a meeting later, we can go back to that point that I mentioned. This is where I think we can actually push the envelope by adding this part.
I love that and completely agree. That is an excellent strategy to use. I think it also depends on the nature of the meeting and how quickly decisions are getting made. Because if decisions are being made right now, and I've been in many briefings where, very senior decision makers are making decisions now. They're making them right in front of me. And it's crucial that, if I see something that, really needs to be discussed or cannot be missed, or if people are glossing over something, or if people are we do need to have this conversation. And in those situations, I agree with you. It's still important to be strategic and in that case, what I suggest is pull out things that various people of significance in the meeting said to show how you're actually pulling their ideas together. Plus, in those kinds of rooms, there's always lots of ego. There's ego flapping all over the place. So you need to recognize the ego, right? It's okay. It's okay to recognize the ego and say, John made an excellent point on that. And, and as, Matthew said, blah, 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 and pulling these things together, say, and the one thing that I really think is important based on that is, and then make the point, be very clear in the rationale, right? And it does take practice, but I mean, once you're at those leadership levels, you can think up that rationale pretty quickly on the fly. So in other words, the approach is make sure that you are still appealing to the ego in the room while you do speak up, and then make sure that you have solid rationale that is not only just solid business rationale that's evidence-based, but also make sure you're positioning it in a way that appeals to the audience. If there are any challenges associated with what you're suggesting, make sure to overcome those challenges on the spot by saying, I recognize that such and such is a risk. Here's, my proposed mitigation strategy. And of course, we can take that away and develop it further. But, there is precedent for that working well based on A, B, and C, right? So in those moments, absolutely. But I love that strategy of the teaser and then making sure that people need to come back for more. I would also suggest putting it in writing after the meeting and just saying, I'll reach out with some thoughts after this meeting, because that way it's also in writing that it was you, that it was your idea, and here's what you are putting forward.
Documented.
Yeah, it's documentation.
Yeah. So in these moments, so everybody, regardless of what industry we're in or what level we're in, everybody with an agile mind wants to navigate and move up the whatever ladder we're in. And just in relation to some of the things that we've spoken about and how difficult it can be to mentally get ourselves in shape where we're confident enough to be vocal, to be seen and to be heard. Is there any merits in, and this I don't know how easy or difficult this is, but to take some of the stress out of trying to be heard and to be seen, by maybe trying somehow to have some fun with it, to maybe almost treating it as a game, to kind of to get somebody to I don't know, to respond to me, or to maybe acknowledge me, to maybe I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to kind of say, is there any merits in trying to kind of take some of the stress out of work, which invariably is quite stressful?
Absolutely. So I think that there are different ways of adapting, and typically, particularly for people who are othered in some way, we are experts in adapting because we've had to adapt. And so what it sounds like is the idea of adapting goals. So, in a given situation, for example, we often hear people say that, oh, your career development is your responsibility. So, you got to go pedal to the metal and really push hard. Okay, sometimes there's merit to that. But on the other hand, do you want to burn yourself out? And what about your mental and emotional well-being? Because your mental and emotional well-being matter just as much. If your mental and emotional well-being are not in a good place, you're not actually going to be able to perform well at work, and you're not going to enjoy life. And, we're all living life. We're all people before we're employees. So, let's take care of our whole selves. And so I love the idea of almost gamifying it, right, a bit. Really what that is adjusting, what is my goal? What is do I have an overall goal, first of all? Like, let's say, am I trying to reach X level in this organization? Well, do you want to? Right? Like, just pause for a second. Like, maybe we've been working on this assumption that, I want to reach that level in this organization. Well, but do you actually want that in this organization? Maybe you want that, and maybe you should have that. Maybe it doesn't need to be in this particular place. Maybe it could be in a place that is more progressive, or, and actually has evidence of that. And maybe it's okay to adjust a goal. And if you are adjusting a goal, maybe if you don't want to be at that level here, maybe you can have more fun with it, because frankly, maybe it matters less. And maybe you can preserve your energy more, because preserving your energy is crucial when it comes to networking and building relationships through informal conversations and performing well in interviews. So I absolutely agree with the idea of reassessing every so often, what is my goal? What is my goal actually? What are my assumptions? And is that assumption actually correct? Maybe try arguing the opposite assumption. Try it out. Absolutely. Just see how it fits, right? And then, see if you have other options, and then you find that other options do open up to you.
Okay, lovely. So I love this narrative around leadership. We've covered some things here that are really impactful. And regardless of what organization we're in, whether we're a smaller organization, a bigger or a mid-sized or an enterprise organization, these are really fundamental. Leaders around failure, and because when we think about leaders, we think about these people that they walk into the office very, quite bold characters. They don't really make any mistakes, and they're always getting things done. Should leaders not be afraid of making mistakes, and when they do have difficult moments, are there ways in which they should feel comfortable responding, and maybe should we not fear making mistakes? Obviously we don't, not going out. Actually, maybe some people do. I listen to. I'm a big fan of Stephen Bartlett, his podcast Diary of a CEO, and I think one of his episodes he talked about they have recently he's employed a director of experimentation, so a director of experiments. So it's like, let's test it, see if it works. If it works, wonderful. If it doesn't, what new information do we have?
Yes. So failure happens all the time, every day, whether we want it or not, to everybody, to everybody. And it's already happening. And I think that quite often we don't want to realize that. And it's okay that we're failing in something every day because we are humans, right? Like we're humans before we're an employee. We're humans before we're a leader. We are failing in something every day because we literally cannot be perfect. If we were utterly perfect and every single person did absolutely everything perfectly, well, this world would be in a completely different place, and there would literally be no problems in it because everyone would be perfect. So we are failing every day anyway. I think where the challenges can be, and there's kind of two aspects to this I want to point out. So the first is that I think that it's important for each of us as leaders to recognize that we are failing in some way regularly. And that's okay because we are human. The question is, what are we doing when we realize that we've made a mistake?
Okay.
It's about taking accountability. Now, sometimes it's something super small, like, you just, maybe you were, you weren't clear enough in describing something when you were trying to action something to someone. That's a failure, right? It's not catastrophic, but it's still, that is a shortcoming. That's a failure. Right to, you actually said something that was harmful to someone. So regardless, a high quality leader needs to take responsibility for that. And if you made a mistake in public, you need to apologize in public. If you made a mistake, in a one-on-one, you need to apologize in that one-on-one. But you really need to take accountability for these things. And I've done this countless times as a leader. And I think some people are worried, will that make me look weak? I mean, anyone knows the amount of strength and courage it takes to say, wow, I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that. Here are the reasons that I can tell that was damaging. Here's my plan for making sure that doesn't happen again. I'm deeply sorry for that. But I think the other aspect of it is ourselves. How are we engaging when someone else is failing or has failed? And again, it comes down to, there's always a personal cost when someone else is failing in a way that is impacting us. And we need to make a decision about what we're going to do with that, right? Because if, for example, there was an executive that I worked with for some time who, have you heard the adage, sometimes, someone learns to use a hammer and then they use a hammer for everything. It's the idea of, you're learning one skill and then trying to apply that to everything because they've had success. Yeah. And, I worked for an executive who had a particular skill in asking questions. And I think they thought they were being like really strategic, but it was often in ways that entrapped people. And, this wasn't just with me, this was with lots of people. And my feeling was there was a situation where we were I was overseeing a very significant change on a project, and the change had to be made, and it was hard, and we were doing it on very short timelines. And, a couple of people had gone on to take promotional opportunities, and I had wholeheartedly supported them, even though I knew it was going to be hard. And we realized with like a couple of business days before, the launch of something that, if we do this, this is going to make this really confusing for people. Oh boy, that's not good. We need to fix that. And so, I jumped right on that, worked through a solution with the staff person, took it to the executive and said, by the way, we've just realized X, here's the solution. and it solves for these problems. So it never actually became a problem. We intercepted a possible problem. But this person, for a lot of unconscious reasons, didn't like me as much as some of my colleagues who are not racialized and who are not neurodivergent. And I don't think they had any idea that they had those issues with me, but it was clear. It's clear when you're on the other side. And they actually, they started asking some of these entrapping questions. And I remember at the time being very uncomfortable. My feeling in the moment was I didn't notice that it was happening. I didn't notice in time. I didn't pick up on where they were going, because trying to understand where this person was going with their questions, it was like trying to play chess in 5 directions at the same time. And so I answered a question earnestly, and then they proceeded to misuse my answer and twist it against me for months to come. I failed in that moment to capture where they were really going. Was it a fair fight? Probably not. But you know what? Where was then the failure next? What did I do with that information? Did I act in time to realize that this probably isn't an ideal situation to continue to work for someone who they want to keep using this hammer? Probably not. Right. But, so my failing was, double fold in that moment where, sure, I got failed. I was failed. Absolutely. Because that wasn't cool. Like, the fact is, I actually saved the day. Right. I actually saved the day. But, I missed the opportunity in the moment, which lots of us do. That happens. Right. And, what I recommend for that actually is doing regular pause and reflect and meditation. It helps get you faster at seeing those strategic opportunities. But then the longer term failure was I enjoyed what I was doing so much that I allowed that to outweigh the damage that was being done in this situation. So that was a secondary failure. But you know what, again, we all learn from that. And I had to apologize to myself for that. We talk a lot about, accountability to others. Well, what about to myself? I allowed myself to stay in that situation, and it took a long time to realize I actually had to say sorry to myself for that, because, I did let myself down in that situation. I protected my teams from that, but I didn't protect myself from that. And so I think there is a measure of grace that we need to allow both to ourselves and others when it comes to failure. And instead of looking at the I screwed up, where's the opportunity next, right? Where's the opportunity? Like, yes, it happened. Okay, now that we're looking forward, like, let's turn back around and look forward. And now where do we want to go next? And how can we empower ourselves that way?
Yeah, totally. Totally. And I think it's having that, like in your scenario, in your situation, it's almost like, to me, it feels like you've got that self-awareness, you've examined it, and you understand what's happened. And now the grace is coming in, giving yourself some grace. I understand this happened. I need to, and understand how I can deal with that better the next time. Because over the years, I've been in situations where you'll have a discussion, it's in a meeting. Sometimes you feel like you're kind of getting railroaded, where you're offering an opinion on something. So the scenario may have been, it's almost you're outmaneuvered in that, in a conversation, you're kind of outmaneuvered.
Precisely.
And you kind of zero in on a point, and maybe that wasn't the point I wanted to make, because I've really thought maybe sometimes you go in the defense and you answer in defense mode, and actually that isn't the answer you want to give. You actually want to give the proper answer. So when I'm in defense mode, the answer that I give it's almost not it's not the right answer. It's a defensive positioning point. And when I've left the meeting and I've reflected, I thought I didn't get my point across at all. I've totally missed my point. So my opportunity to shine would have been answering a question, not answering it in defense mode, in a defensive mode.
Precisely. And, and I think we've all done that. We have all left a meeting or a conversation thinking, no, but that's not what my point was. That's not what I was trying to say, or I got misunderstood, or, whatever happened. And I think, again, you're completely, right on with the self-awareness and offering grace to yourself. But I think there's also the opportunity to then follow up. You can follow up in an email, that you're sending to the people who are at the meeting, or, if you're sending it to one person, always make sure you're copying another, just again, just to, to be savvy about it. But to say, a point that, that I was also hoping to make during the meeting was, and then the thing that you actually wanted to say, because then at least you're still getting to communicate it. But you're not giving it, you don't have to give reasons why. You don't owe anyone any reasons for why you didn't say it in the meeting, but getting that opportunity, you're still creating, I guess, that opportunity for yourself to still communicate that, that thing that was important to you.
Okay, lovely. We're getting towards the end now. I literally could talk to you forever about this subject because it's such a fascinating subject, and it's a subject that is relevant pretty much to anybody. As soon as we get to a certain age, leadership is important. As soon as we get to, I guess, as a child, we're starting to develop these skills. But I think one of the last questions I wanted to ask is around the idea that maybe we're in a meeting, and in that meeting, maybe there's somebody that to your point, the example, I guess you kind of answered it, but to your point, there was a person in the meeting that never really acknowledged our value or the points that we're trying to put across. And in many respects, there might be lots of things going on with them. We're not the issue; they're the issue. Maybe they don't have the self-awareness. Maybe that they feel that they're. Because I think sometimes when we're not as good as we think we are at something, and we kind of know that deep down, and maybe we're worried about other people working that out. Maybe we feel that we have to own every situation because we fear being exposed. And sometimes the way that it manifests itself in those individuals shutting down anybody that they know, these people know what they're talking about. That person knows what they're talking about. Is there any way, and I'm sure most people that are watching this or listening to this can think of maybe a moment in their career, actually, or maybe it's happening now, but yeah, that was like a meeting I had today. That's like a meeting I had last week. Do you have any advice in those situations? I think you've kind of answered it a little bit anyway, but I just thought I'd repackage it and answer that again.
Yeah. So absolutely. So I think that the first thing is, to pause, ask yourself what your big goal is. And I don't mean in the meeting. I mean, is this a place that you want to be? Is this a place that you really want to be? Because is the problem just one person, or is the problem bigger than that? Is someone being permitted to railroad other people? And frankly, regardless of how someone may be trying to compensate for a lack of internal security, at the end of the day, and it may not be about you, it may be their issue, but especially for people who are othered. If you are othered in the workplace, it's very easy sometimes to think, but I'm not the one who's the problem. I shouldn't have to leave. Like I'm good at, I'm really quality. I shouldn't have to be the one to leave. Sure, you don't have to be the one to leave, but it's going to cost you more than it's costing other people. And so I would encourage people, even in that moment, in that meeting, zoom out a bit and actually ask yourself, what is your bigger goal? What do you actually want? Because that is like the bigger storybook that's going to help you decide where you want to take your chapters, right? Because ultimately what you need to decide in that moment is, what outcome do I want right now? And also, what outcome do I want long-term? Because the long-term outcome, there's going to be a long-term outcome no matter what I do in this meeting. Whether I stay silent and say nothing, then everything just continues as it is. If I say something, it could go fine, or it could not go fine for me. And there is going to be a long-term outcome. So understanding what it is that's important to you is really important. Like, do you want to continue to be there? And then trying to figure out in that moment, well, what is then important and salient to the meeting? Like, what is the degree of importance we're talking about? For example, is anyone going to die as a result of the decisions being made in this meeting? No? Okay. So first of all, the importance meter can come down just a little bit. If no one's lives are actually on the line about the things we're discussing, okay, maybe it's our livelihoods, but that's different, right? That's a different conversation. So what is the actual, matter of importance? Because again, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the important when we're staring at the urgent. And then there's the, how does this relate to my work? Is someone else really impinging on something that's my responsibility, or are they trying to speak for me or speak in relation to me or speak over me when that's actually not appropriate? And so then it's a case of figuring out, how do I want to interject? Because, we talked earlier about how sometimes it can feel uncomfortable or uncertain sometimes in terms of how do we interject in those meetings. So all of this work is to get to the point of, is my interjection worth whatever it will cost me? Because it will cost me. It will cost me in some way, whether, even if it's just stress, it's going to cost me something. And is it worth it? And then coming back to those points we made earlier of, okay, how can I be strategic then? And, and make sure that I'm, the person who really needs their voice to be heard, regardless of whether it's insecurity or just super big ego because they're overconfident. Like, lots of people also have the opposite problem, where they're talking really loud and making big points because they really think they're just, amazing and outstanding. And that's okay, but, people can be loud for various reasons. So regardless, it's okay to pull from what they're saying. So, we're calming their ego and they're being heard, while also pulling in ideas from other people in the room, because typically other people have also been contributing. It's just so many people are paying attention to that one person. So how can we also pull from other people's ideas while we're also therefore edifying them and building up, even if it's just a minuscule collaborative spirit, by pulling out the pieces that other people have said. It's actually building a little bit of buy-in in the room. And loud person may not like it because they only want their idea to be heard and no one else's, but all the other people in the room who you've pulled, and you've given them credit for their ideas before making your own. And then again, coming back to the rationale, again, the business rationale, as well as the rationale of the specific audience, overcoming any objections, that will go a long way.
Okay, amazing. And I think this is 3 questions left, and then we're done. So,
okay.
And I was just thinking about leaders, because we've got sometimes people that are overconfident, that are very vocal, and they want to dominate the meeting. Sometimes what can happen in those scenarios, those situations, is that I think people can switch off a bit, because we're being loud and we're being vocal, we're dominating. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're being listened to. So if we're not being listened to, then where's the value in dominating a meeting? And it might massage our own ego, but the end result is we're not being listened to. People aren't holding us in that valued esteem that we want to be held in. So for maybe leaders, that they might actually think that maybe I can sense that in me a little bit. And it's not because, and they might not be doing it because they want to, they might be doing it for the right reasons, but they feel that that's a leader, that's the way that they have to position themselves. But really what they want is to be listened to. Maybe if they reflect, they might think, what, I'm not entirely sure from the amount that I speak in these meetings that I'm actually being listened to. Maybe if they've got that self-awareness, they can think, actually, I actually want to give my team value, and also I want to contribute where I need to be, and not all the time. Do you have any advice for anybody that thinks, yeah, that does relate? I think, I can see that in me a little bit.
Right. And so, I think for people who are starting to have a bit of self-awareness that maybe they're unintentionally dominating conversations when they don't really want to, they just really want to be heard. I think that that's a really important thing to notice, is they want to be heard. And if you want to be heard, probably everyone else around you also wants to be recognized, wants to be witnessed. And so what I would suggest for folks who are starting to have that, self-awareness and realize that, okay, I've realized that's a thing I'm doing. It's maybe not achieving the outcomes I want. So what can I do about it? Is to go into the observation mode. How I talked about when I would take, go into a new team, I go into observation mode and I'm not making any changes. I'm actually not trying to, I'm in that moment, I don't actually appear to be leading, because I'm sitting back and I'm observing. It's okay to go into observer mode and really listen. Like, you want to, start to get curious, treat it a bit like a mystery, right? Like a mystery, like you've got a magnifying glass and you're being the inspector and you're trying to really listen for what is Like, where is each person coming from? Make a goal for yourself that in each meeting, you're going to take note of something valuable that each person says, because now you're also giving yourself a task where you need to listen. And if you do find yourself talking, then realizing, oh, I need to go back into listening mode. Let me ask a question because I still haven't, oh, these two people, I still haven't noted anything valuable they've said because I haven't talked yet. How can I ask them a question to hear their ideas, right? If you give yourself a little goal like that, where in every meeting you're noting down something important that each person has said, because every person has something important to add, right? Yeah. And it may not be a super long thing, but it doesn't need to be, right? Big insights don't need to be long. And so, I think doing that will really help because then, everyone around you will feel more heard. And also, you'll be able to more specifically target any insights you do share. And because you're listening more, people will want to listen to you, right? And then realize, hey, yeah, you made a good point. And also, you picked up on that thing that I said, you heard me, right?
Yeah.
So that I think that's what I would suggest for folks
Okay.
who have that as a goal.
Okay, amazing. Amazing. We've covered so much today here. It's amazing stuff. Really insightful stuff. We definitely have to have another conversation around this subject because
I would love that.
It's fascinating and we don't have enough time to cover everything. So penultimate question is where can people find you, find out more about you?
Absolutely. They can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm the only Malumir Logan on LinkedIn, so you can look me up there. I also have a website, acornandburdock.ca, because Canada. And I have all sorts of content there, while much of it is, spiritual blog post and growth mindset. I do also have a lot of leadership content there that I have on LinkedIn. So that's the second place.
Okay, so different subjects we can cover next time.
Yes.
And okay, so last question is, so if you could invite three inspirational people for dinner, they can be live or past, who would you invite?
I think the first person I would invite would be someone named Fu Hao. She was from the Shang dynasty, and she was both a military general and a high priestess. And I mean, that is my vibe. I love that. Right? A very powerful, powerful woman in various ways. And I would want to pick her brain about how she navigated that kind of leadership, that level of leadership in that era. I would really want to understand, I would want to understand her approach to strategic thinking. The second person would be my maternal grandfather. I actually never, he died 2 years before I was born, and he sounds like someone that I would have just loved to meet and, and get to talk about all sorts of things. He was athletic. He was a really big swimmer, and I'm currently dealing with a lot of medical stuff, but normally I'm very athletic as well. And he also, had a business. He was a business owner, and I would just want to talk with him about everything and get to know him and get to know about his upbringing. And then for the third, in Ottawa, which is Canada's capital, there's this memorial to, and it's called To an Unknown Fallen Soldier. And the idea of the memorial is to acknowledge that there are lots of people who we don't know what their names were. We don't know who they were, but we know that they made great sacrifices. And I think I think about all the work, fighting the good fight on anti-oppression and, genuine equity and meaningful diversity. And I think about all of that. And the fact is there have been so many people over the centuries who have done so much important work in all sorts of realms, from, hard science to social science and suffrage and all of these different, important topics. And I don't know all of those people. Yeah. And I'm sure there's someone that maybe no one ever even knew. Maybe they never became famous, but they did work that really mattered to someone. I want to have them as a third person because I want to hear what their story is.
And there'll be like millions potentially.
There will be millions.
There'll be millions of people that are
Yes.
part of that number. Malumir, it's been amazing. Really enjoyed this. It's really insightful, really thought provoking. And I think for anybody that listens to this or watches this, I think there's a ton of insights and tools that they can take away and really help them to perform and to flourish in whatever organization they're in. And if I think everybody's a leader, but whatever role of leadership we have within our business, listening to you, I think they will be definitely, they can go to work tomorrow armed with some new tools that they can use and some new ideas that they can bring into play. And I suggest that I'll leave a link to your website on the show notes so everybody can actually look at your website and maybe look at the leadership stuff, the growth mindset stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. And it really does warm my heart to imagine that our conversation will be helping and supporting and empowering people out there. That means everything.
Absolutely. We're all over the world. Different people will pick up different things and they can implement it, go to work tomorrow confident with some new ideas that they're going to implement. So thank you. And until our next conversation.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of My Perfect Failure. If you're watching on YouTube, please do hit the subscribe button. It really does help us grow the channel, which is a huge objective. And your feedback is most welcome. So we're keen to hear about the things you like and equally the things you don't like. So you can find me at paul@myperfectfailure.com, or you can find me via the contact page on the website. So take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.